This is Unit 5 Biology Revision, a second revision video, and this is looking at the circulatory system in different organisms and the cardiac cycle. So this is an example of a single-celled organism. This is an amoeba. An amoeba doesn't need a circulatory system because it has a very large surface area to volume ratio. It manages to get its oxygen via diffusion from its surroundings, usually water. Now, the fact that it's got a large surface area to volume ratio means that there's a large area for diffusion to occur, and the fact that it's so small means that the oxygen doesn't have a big distance to travel into the cell, and carbon dioxide doesn't have a big distance to travel outside of the cell. Now, larger organisms do need a circulatory system because it's just not efficient enough to transport the waste products and the useful products in and out of the cells. So to be able to do this, they have blood within their circulatory system. Here we've got our first example of a circulatory system. This is the circulatory system of a fish, and we call it a single circulatory system. This is because we have two chambers only in the heart of a fish. We've got an atrium and a ventricle. Now that means that the blood can only be pumped in one direction. To the gills to pick up oxygen, where we can see we've got a change in the blood here to represent that there's oxygen in the blood, and then to the rest of the body, to the capillaries, to diffuse oxygen into the tissues for respiration, back to the heart, into the atrium, and again we get that cycle continuing. This system is also an example of a closed circulatory system. This means that the blood is contained within the vessels and the heart. And as in mammals and things like that, they still have the same blood vessels such as arteries, veins and capillaries. Here we've got another example of a closed circulatory system, and this is, for example, a human heart and circulatory system. This is a double pump or double circulatory system. We can see this because we've got two sides of the heart which pump to different areas in the body. So if we start this side of the heart, we get the blood pumped out of the heart via the aorta to the rest of the body. This will supply them with oxygen and take in carbon dioxide to be taken to the lungs. We get it travelling back to the heart via the vena cava into this side of the heart, which then the blood is pumped via the pulmonary artery to the lungs where it picks up oxygen. Takes this back to the heart via the pulmonary vein. Remember that pulmonary means anything to do with the lungs. Humans and other mammals have this double circulatory system, this double pump, due to their size. So we've got 4 chambers of the heart in 2 sides which allow the blood to be pumped at high pressure around the body. This means that it can transport materials around the body a lot more quickly. Insects are examples of organisms that have an open circulatory system. Now this is different to a closed circulatory system in that the blood substitute is not always contained within blood vessels. Now the way this works is down the back of the insect here we have a blood vessel, the aorta, and here we have chambers of a heart. Now what happens is that the fluid will travel along this aorta, it will exit into the body cavity and filter through, providing nutrients to the rest of the body. Here we can see, as represented by these arrows, that the fluid will then return to the hearts via openings here called ostia within the heart chambers. Insects do not contain haemoglobin. Why is this? They contain a substance called hemolymph, as shown here. Now, this does not carry oxygen. The reason it doesn't carry oxygen is because insects have special structures that provide oxygen inside the body. These are breathing tubes which are from the outside of the body, on the exoskeleton, through into the inside of the body, and these are called spiracles. So these spiracles provide oxygen directly to the tissues, so there's no need for a transport system within the body of an insect. The hemolymph carries amino acids, sugars, ions, things like that, and also some white blood cells so that they can fight off infection. So next we're going to look at the contribution of a couple of scientists named Galen and William Harvey in their contributions towards the knowledge about the circulatory system today. So this is the scientist Galen. He worked on monkeys and pigs and dissected them, and what he noticed was that the blood in veins was darker than the blood found in the arteries. Now, with the very limited knowledge that they had back at that time, he thought that the liver actually made the blood, produced it, pumped it into the veins to the organs, and that the organs actually consumed it. It wasn't until the 16th century where Leonardo da Vinci studied anatomy and began to draw the different structures that he was looking at. He made a drawing showing how blood passed through the heart chambers and how the heart valves worked within the heart. This is William Harvey, and in the 17th century he realised that the pulse was linked to the contraction of the left ventricle. He also realised that veins have valves to prevent backflow of blood, and he suggested that capillaries existed in the body, but he could not prove it because he couldn't see them without a microscope. And here are some questions. If you'd like to have a go at them, feel free to pause this video. So keeping what the heart does to a very basic level, the blood enters the heart into the atria. The atria contract, and that forces blood through the valves between the atrium and the ventricle. The blood enters the ventricle. The walls of the ventricle contract, forcing blood out of the arteries to the lungs or the rest of the body, depending on which side of the heart it is. Now, being a muscle tissue, the heart needs a continuous supply of substances such as glucose, oxygen, fatty acids, so that the muscle cells can carry out aerobic respiration to release energy for this contraction to happen. Now, when the ventricles contract, they contract really strongly, and it forces the blood out of the heart via the arteries at very high pressure. As this blood makes its way around the circulatory system from the arteries to the arterioles right down to the capillaries, this amount of pressure decreases. As the blood eventually reaches the veins, the blood pressure is so low that valves are required in those blood vessels to prevent the blood flowing backwards. As we can see here, the left side of the heart, where the left ventricle lies, the muscle is a lot thicker than at the right side of the heart. This is so that we can get a very strong contraction in the ventricle to force the blood right the way around the body, whereas this side of the heart, the right side, forces the blood to the lungs, and if this was high pressure, then you would risk rupturing blood vessels in the lungs. Now, the rate at which the heart contracts is controlled by what we call the pacemaker cells, and these provide a small electrical current, and that stimulates this cardiac muscle, the heart muscle, to contract. Now, as the ventricle contracts and forces blood through the arteries, the walls of the arteries, as that blood flows through, they expand and recoil, so you get sort of like a bulge going along the artery at different points. This is what we know as the pulse, and you can detect the pulse in an artery where it passes over a bone or very close to your skin, and pulse rate is a measure of your heart rate. We're now going to look at a bit more detail into the cardiac cycle, which is controlled by the pacemaker cells. Now, the cardiac cycle is defined as the series of events during one contraction. So this starts off with what we call the sinoatrial node. These pacemaker cells are found within the heart muscle, and we can see from the atrial part of the name that the electrical impulses that they produce are going to work on the atria, and they cause the atria to contract. Now, that contraction here in the atria forces the blood through the atrioventricular valves, and from there the blood enters the ventricles. We've then got another group of pacemaker cells called the atrioventricular node, and they conduct impulses down the centre of the heart to the Purkinje fibres. Now, the Purkinje fibres are found here, right along the bottom of the heart. And when the impulse reaches ththese Purkinje fibres, they cause the ventricles at the bottom of the heart to contract. This contraction of the ventricles causes the atrioventricular valves going through the centre of the heart here to close. And because the blood can't go backwards on itself back into the atria, the blood flows out of the heart via the arteries through these structures here called the semilunar valves. And at this point the atria relax, they fill with blood and the cycle starts again. Each one of these cycles is what we would perceive as a heartbeat and takes around 1 second to complete each time. So two things that could affect the heart rate that we're going to look into are exercise and the hormone adrenaline. So let's consider how these two factors can affect the heart rate. So with exercise, when you are exercising, your muscles will respire more, you'll need more oxygen and glucose, and you'll make more carbon dioxide, which will enter into your blood. Now, as we know, carbon dioxide in your blood will reduce the pH and could cause enzymes to denature if it doesn't exit your blood very quickly. So the brain detects this extra carbon dioxide in your blood and sends impulses to the heart's pacemaker to speed up the heart rate, getting more blood around the body and to the lungs to get rid of this extra carbon dioxide. Now, adrenaline is produced when you're scared or excited, but also when you exercise, and when this is released it travels into your blood and to the heart's pacemaker, which speeds up the heart rate, and this is why this hormone can make your heart increase the heart rate. However, not only does it get rid of extra CO2 in the blood if you need to get rid of that, but if your heart rate is increased, it means that the muscle cells will need to respire more, so it will deliver more oxygen and glucose to the heart muscle itself so that it can continue to beat so many times per minute. Sometimes people will develop heart problems, and when this arises, doctors can use a couple of methods to detect any issues with the heartbeats or heart impulses. The two techniques are called electrocardiograms or ECGs and echocardiograms. Now, the electrocardiograms will show if the heart rate is normal or not, so that will look into the electrical impulses within the heart and how they control the heartbeat. So if a patient is diagnosed with an irregular heartbeat, or if it's too fast or too slow, they may need an artificial pacemaker. Once this is fitted, it will provide the heart with the normal electrical impulses that will allow the heart to beat normally. And again, if you'd like to have a go at any of these questions, feel free to pause this video, and if you need any help on this, come and see me.